Years ago, I was picking up pizza from Bartolo's in Palmyra late one night, and down a little from them, crossing the road, was an odd, shadowy, hunched over, humanoid form with red eyes that was hopping across the road in a nearby copse of trees. I live in Burnhamwood and once was passing through the reservation on 47 to pick up a friend, and I saw a Bigfoot east of Neopit. It was later in the day. I have two friends who had seen a sabe while in the woods on the Mano Mini Indian reservation. We all live in Neopit, a small town on the reservation. One friend was out riding on Bass Lake Road hunting. He was just riding, road hunting. He said he seen something black in the woods, figuring it was a bear. When he backed up to take another look, he seen a sabe standing in the woods. It started walking away, and he just watched it until he couldn't see it anymore. He called my friend and said, "Guess what? I just seen by your hunting camp." My other friend said, "A big buck?" "No, a Sasquatch. We all know they are here. Some people don't believe, but that must be the young people." My other friend was out ginseng picking with a friend. He said one was standing next to an uprooted tree. It was about 10 feet tall, he said. They both stared at each other and then started walking towards them, so he took off running. Didn't even tell his friend what he seen or why he took off running. His friend ran after him, also fighting, saying he seen a black bear or something. He never seen it again after he took off. It took him years to go back in the woods after seeing the Sasquatch. I went into a nature preserve and found an area that said, "Do not enter, sensitive research area." I went in and it felt like a land never seen before. I then heard a war around me, thousands of gunshots, and I ran out of it, diving over the tree stumps and losing my dog's leash. When I arrived at the land across the road, I asked people if they heard any gunshots. Everyone looked at me strange. I had the feeling I was in another time. When I saw an ET triangle craft at midnight, I couldn't move or talk. Around 1977, two friends and I decided to go camping on Mount Shasta. I knew this area quite well. There's a road called Military Pass Road that runs north and south on the east side of Mount Shasta. Absolutely gorgeous anyway. We took a road called Ash Creek to the end of the mountain. Being young, we just drew down tarp and our sleeping bags and spent the night with no problems. The next morning, we took a hike across Ash Creek, found a good game trail, wanted to see if it would take a peek at the ridge. While walking around a huge sugar pine there on the ground, no way to say this gently, but the biggest effing turd I've ever seen in my life must have been 4 inches in diameter, 14 to 18 inches long. It was old scat, full of hair, more than I've ever seen in coyote poop. Been hunting the Pacific Northwest for 50 years, never came across anything like it. In the late 1960s, while hiking the old DuPont dock in June, I came upon an enormous bird perched on a stump, looking out over the water. I couldn't have been there more than 20 feet away when it flew off. It was all black and brown, twice or more the size of any eagle I've seen in the 50 plus years since. I'm a believer. In the early 80s, I was on our family farm in Luca, Illinois, outside of my grandmother's house, when I saw a huge bird land in the field. It was larger than any vulture. I ran across the holler to our house to wait for my dad's arrival from work. When he drove in, I told him what I seen and which field it was in. He told me it was probably a turkey vulture. I pointed to one and told him, "That bird that I saw was much larger than that. I have no idea what it was. I wonder if it was a harpy eagle, but it wasn't really shaped like one." I remember as a tiny kiddo back then playing out in our front yard in Malarkoville, Illinois, Aurora Township. and seeing and feeling dark shadows going over me in the yard. I'd look up and there wouldn't be a cloud in the sky. I remember running in to tell my mom, and she would say, "It must be those thunderbirds." I seen one of these birds in Decatur, Illinois, 3 days after the boy got picked up in 1977. I was fishing at a place called Big Creek. I was fishing for bluegill when I seen a shadow go over the creek. I originally thought it was a plane because its shadow covered the whole creek, but when I looked up, it was a very large bird. I got a good look at it. It had a white ring around its neck, and it also had a green ring around its neck as well. It flew in just above the treetops. The bird wingspan covered the whole creek, which is about 20 feet. True story. My mom was with me, and she saw it as well. She made me sit in the car afterwards. Dennis Turner was a dear friend of mine. He loved telling the story of a giant bird he saw outside of Downs. Alas, he passed 5 years ago. Seen one 2 times flying and once eating a deer just south of Purdon, Missouri. Flying had estimated wingspan of 15 feet, and on the ground it was about 4 to 5 feet at the shoulder. It looked like a giant golden eagle, but not a mature bird, as it had some white patches in its feathers. A friend of mine in Missouri has Sasquatch on his land, and they have been domesticating the coyotes. Not all of them hate dogs. A couple was hiking on a power line. A sabe rushed them full speed. He knocked the man down, scooped the woman, and headed for the wood line. The guy was watching, unable to do anything. He said a huge sabe stepped out of the woods and called the one carrying the woman by name. He stopped running. Then the big one told him, "Put her down now." He did gently, and the sabe walked into the woods together and disappeared. At the Crowley Nature Museum in Mayaca, Florida, we found possible Sasquatch hair, a 6-toed print. We heard whoops, walking, and stuff being thrown outside our tent. Both nights. My wife, daughter, and I had a close encounter where a large male screamed at us to leave the area. I could see the facial features clearly. 3 years later, in the same area, my brother was with us, and we had 3 rocks, 8 to 10 inches, thrown over our campsite, landing in a shallow water beside our boats. We could hear them mumbling and whistling, chirping 30 to 40 feet in the brush from us. We were on Vancouver Island, British Columbia, 50 miles west of Campbell River. We had encounters 4 different summers while camping. We have left apples and other gifts, and they have taken them. They leave little sticks that are woven in a circle like a dream catcher in return. They seem curious and non-aggressive. However, when they toss large rocks over us, I don't think they want us there. They also throw small pebbles and small twigs into our camp. As the years go by, they seem to be less aggressive. I think it's because we leave them fruit and candy bars for them. It's a really long story of encounters over a 6-year period. It's our favorite fishing and camping spot. Very remote. My wife and I had experience north of here. Never saw anything, but our dogs, a shepherd and Rottweiler, were terrified. They hid under the car and wouldn't come out. We felt like we were being watched the entire night. I had an experience back in 1968. My buddy and I told no one. Didn't want anything, thinking we were nuts. I was archery hunting Desolation unit probably 10 to 12 years ago, and I found some tracks. Barefoot, probably only 13 inches. I posted them to a site and was immediately chastised that they were human. But I was at 8,000 feet elevation, non-conductive to be barefoot. With the only hunting party in the area at the time, I still firmly believe I found Bigfoot tracks. 1970 was the year I encountered one. 20 years later, another man saw one about 10 miles from me. I went back about 2 years ago, me and my wife, about 1 o'clock in the morning. Something was throwing something on top of the house. No trees around, no wind blowing, just threw something. For about 10 minutes, it hit the tin roof. I saw Mr. Big in Vermont. I froze. I did not grab my phone to take a picture. Thought he was a man in black Adidas running suit. Nope, I was wrong. But there is a weight between what your eyes see and when your brain registers what it is seeing. Got hit by a boulder in the back of my leg. Couldn't walk for 3 weeks. Went to the hospital and made up a story. They would never have believed me. I've seen a whole bunches of them last September in North Florida. I've been trying to spread the truth since 1979, and again after my second encounter during the week of 9/11 in Estatica, Oregon, along the Clackamas River. July 1980, UP Bridge, Thornapple River, County Road A, Russ County, Wisconsin. Around 6 p.m., Stein Farm Access Road. Was watching for deer. Instantly, birds stopped chirping. The air went creepily still. Saw the cryptid walking the fence line towards UP Bridge. 7 feet tall, lean, long stride walk, upward motion. Not a black bear. Lasted no more than 10 to 15 seconds. I saw Bigfoot in the woods when I was young. It knocked on a tree 3 times, peeked out from behind tree, knock on, then walk across to another tree. Got to be at least 8 foot tall. Saw 2 in my 65 years. One when I was just a child, and one when I was 14 years old, near Salmon, Idaho. A sight you will never forget. I only came to the bottom of his chest and knew what he told me. Mind your manners, without saying a word. Bet your butt, I sure as hell did. I will always defend Bigfoot and try to keep people away from where they are. I've been a woodsman my entire life. Hunting, fishing, backpacking are my hobbies. I've heard lots of stories about the Uwharrie National Forest and Sasquatch. Several people have claimed to have seen it in the area. I have not. Over the years while backpacking, I have had many critters outside my tent late at night. I've seen skunks, raccoons, squirrel, lots of deer, bear, and even a turkey once in camp at night. It's now the ordinary to have a critter or two camp after midnight. A couple years ago, while at the Uwharrie National Forest on a backpacking trip, I had something come into camp in the middle of the night. I didn't hear it walk though. What woke me up was a loud, low-frequency growl, almost guttural sounding. I've never heard that sound ever in my life, and since then, I've never heard it again. I estimate the sound was 4 to 8 feet from my tent. I was frozen with fear. I'm not afraid to admit that. I had my pistol with me and was still so terrified. I didn't even grab for my headlamp. I just laid there and listened. It made the sound 3 times. The first woke me up, the second was within a minute of the first, and the last sound was within 30 seconds of the second. I heard what sounded like footsteps a couple minutes after that last sound was made. It was something big, breaking twigs and leaves 20 to 30 feet away from camp. I heard nothing for another minute or two, then heard some more branches and twigs breaking. This time, sounds were further away, possibly 100 feet or more in the distance. I heard nothing for the rest of the night, early morning. I have no idea what time this actually happened. I didn't grab my phone to check the time. I was too scared to move. The only movement I made the entire time was to unholster my pistol that was under my pillow and have it in my hand. Heard this one morning, about an hour before daytime hunting. It's about 4 seconds in, just before the coyotes kick off. Heard 3 times. Can't explain what is hunted there my entire life. Crazy. A bear-cat creature dropped out of the trees on me, my friend, and our dogs in Bellsville, Ohio. Last night I was watering my garden. I heard something like a rock hitting the ground beside me. Then I heard a tree knock. Then a tree fell across my garden. The next morning I went to see the damage to the garden, and I found 3 stacks of rocks. My daughter and I have seen Bigfoot walking in a ditch line beside the road. If I would have stuck out its arm, it would have touched my vehicle. 2011, coming out of Wyden Ridge, heading towards town of Clay, West Virginia. We have our skunk ape in the Louisiana, Texas area, and you can smell them when they're around. Driving on a back road between Avon Park and the bombing range on a foggy night, I had something big and hairy cross the road ahead of me. I just couldn't make out a figure, an eye shine that would have made it between 7 to 8 feet tall. Went back the next morning but couldn't find any prints. The ground was sugar sand and grass, and with the fog and heavy dew overnight erased any evidence that there might have been. I believe I seen one on Arbuckle Creek Road one evening. Had 4 of my kids with me. They all seen it too. It was big, squatted down on the side of the road. Looks like a roll of hay. It was so big. Went back the next morning and got some hair off a fence where I had seen. I still have the hair. When I was probably about 10 years old, about 18 years ago, I was staying at my cousin's house in South Sebring, off of Cloverleaf. Their house was off a side road, butted to a orange grove. In an open lot next to their house, they had a trampoline, sort of between the orange grove and a clump of woods. Well, one night, my cousin and I would jump on a trampoline right after dark, and I heard a low growling noise. I looked around, and right at the edge of the orange grove staring at us was a tall, dark, hairy figure with black eyes. Then they seemed to be glowing, possibly from the moonlight, now that I think about it. It never moved. It just stood at the edge of the tree watching us. I got my cousin's attention. We jumped down and ran inside. I believe at this time, if I remember correctly, we told my other cousin and went back out and looked, but there was nothing there. Whatever it was gone. The one thing my great-great-grandfather spoke about when he was 15 in 1882, the smell was awful, and it's what caught his attention first. Heard a great vocalization on a BFRO expedition while away from the group doing recon, August 2018, Whitehall, New York, Dodge Lane, Washington, Rutland County border. High-pitched scream, not a barn owl, coyote, or a bird, coming from Cogman Pond or Billings Marsh. I haven't had an encounter, but I will say I've seen evidence of Bigfoot, with structures, tree breaks. Then one night, I went out on my porch. I heard the awfulness sound scream I have ever heard in my life. So that would be the closest to an actual encounter I've had. Howling, other stuff, Camp Shelby, Mississippi. My encounter was in 1983. No, I did not see his face. He was too far away from us. But we definitely could see him. My brother Ian, God rest his marine soul, saw him in person. When he came back from Vietnam, people were spitting at our brave soldiers. Ian had enough being around people like Jane Fonda. He went to Oregon and lived in a tent in the mountains. He saw one face to face, and he said it had a human face. Ian said all of a sudden his dog ran to the tent and hid. Ian said he could feel the vibration on the ground, and when he looked outside the tent, he saw Bigfoot, and they both looked at each other. Bigfoot walked away. Ian said they lived in caves, just like they investigated on the show. Ian did not think UFOs had anything to do with Bigfoot. He said they have families. Ian said they have 3-toed Big Feet in Arkansas, and they were mean. Ian said they talked about giants in the Bible and he wasn't afraid of him at all. After what he survived at Vietnam, I guess he wasn't afraid of anything except the people spitting on them in California. Ian always went looking for him every chance he got. Ian also said he knew the Bigfoot language or talking. Had one in the Uwharrie National Forest of North Carolina. It was paralleling me as I descended down a trail. It was just below me in a riverbed. I saw the Dover Demon. I grew up next to Dover, Massachusetts. Saw red eyes shifting in the woods and a black silhouette of something goblin-like. I ran like hell because I was only 12. I saw a ghost on a security camera from my apartment building in Manhattan. I even saved the footage and uploaded it to YouTube under The Ghost of East 58th Street and 1st Avenue. I only have one that stands out in my mind, and that's my dad and I finding a dead deer carcass pulled up into a wood pile in southern Appalachians. Didn't look like the handiwork of a bear or coyotes. Looked like something had to jump and hide it in the pile. If UFOs count, I saw great footage that a friend of mine took in Afghanistan, somewhere in the Middle East. I am sonar tech in the Navy and have seen several unknown lights in the sky that we were tracking on radar. As sonar tech, I've heard so many unknown water noises, it's not even funny. But to be honest, they're probably just unknown marine biologics. I passed a deer in my vehicle one afternoon with my daughters. It seriously stared at us when we drove by. Then it stood up on two legs and started boxing at us. Then it got on all fours and started running full steam at us. I just sped up and quickly drove off. It was a very strange encounter. I never forgot this story an older friend of mine told me. He was super serious, stoic guy, over the top with not believing in any of that crap, and a lifelong hunter. But apparently, he shot a deer and it hit the ground and instantly got up and ran away faster than he'd ever seen before, but on two legs. I saw one while driving to work at WTF o'clock in the morning a few months back, eyes facing forward, reflected wrong, not scared of crap. Definitely gave off the feeling of trying to look like a deer, but got the evil Wish app image instead. At first, I thought it was a deer, but then as I drove past it, it looked more like a dog. A deer-sized dog. It was dark and I was terrified. I still turned around to pass it again, but it was wrong. I had to go to the ER one night after work and got my girlfriend at the time to go with me because it was already after 7 and I didn't want to drive that far by myself tired, from Claypool Hill, Virginia to Abingdon and back, plus the wait and finally seeing someone. We got to her house around 3:30 in the morning. Where it was late, I was smoking. I was going to go through the back door to make less noise. She would go through and turn on the back light on so I could see. I was already at the porch when I heard her go to the front door, so I'm just standing out there in the dark waiting. And soon, as she turned on the light, something raised up and took off running down the fence line in the worst possible way because it was just wrong, everything about it, and it creaked a little. It was brown and pretty good size because you could hear its steps, but the pattern was wrong. If it was a deer, all of its legs were deformed and its little hooves are missing. I thought I was getting rushed by a dang mountain lion at first, but when the light came on, it took off and ran by me instead. If it was a cougar, it had the longest, weirdest legs. That's not even the weirdest thing that happened there. Her sister lives right beside her, and her husband were outside one night, maybe smoking, but they heard something in the bushes in front of them. She said something tall with red eyes came out and looked at them and then took off. I've heard all kinds of things stomping in the woods there when I'd smoke at night. Her parents went out of town for a week, so I went to stay with her. My son wouldn't want to be there alone in any way. which is probably good because that was a weird effing week. I went on the front porch one night to smoke, which is way creepier anyway. Something whistled at me. Apparently the woods are haunted too. There's a weird effing mound of stones in it, and apparently it's always just been there. She was on the phone with me one night on her back porch, and 2 deer walked around the corner of the house because she got real quiet and excited and said, "Oh, 2 deer." But then she froze and said, "F, that's a wolf. There's a wolf with these deer." She said it's too big to be a coyote. I could tell she was scared, but she watched him for a minute. She said both deer were like just unaware of this thing that was right between them. It's called Paint Lick because of the Native Americans' rock paintings. Whole area is still cursed to hell and back though. You mean nope deer? I hate them. I seen one and turned the other way. Walked calmly, trying not to panic about it. 'Cause you run, they chase. Also seen a skinned pedestrian crossing the road when I was coming home from my cousin's one day. And while they were out driving, I had to do a double take, 'cause even my cousin saw a humanoid figure turn into what we thought was sort of like a coyote, but it disappeared in thin air. Told me elder about it too. I've seen them. I live in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in the suburbs. There's deer all over the place. But every once in a while in a group, there's one that stands out. They don't hold themselves the way the deer with CWD, chronic wasting disease, does either. Their joints are connected wrong somehow. When they move, at first it seems disjointed, but when they run, they move like a predator does. And when they make eye contact with you, you can clearly see whatever you're looking at is definitely not a deer. Not by our standard definition. These are something else entirely, and really unsettling to see in the suburbs. My daughter came across one. She said it was black and very tall. It was behind a tree. They're there one moment and gone the next. We live in North Carolina, and she came running inside totally freaked out, and my mom doesn't get freaked out by animals. She once got super close to a black bear and her cubs playing in a creek just to admire them for an hour. She just kept saying, "It was a deer, but it wasn't a deer." She hasn't gone into the woods since. I live in southwestern Virginia and had an experience with my 16-year-old son about 2 months ago. Driving home from the in-laws late one night, coming down the road where the National Forest Service have an outpost compound to include some storage buildings and equipment storage, we see some eye shine in the headlights consistent with the deer on all 4. That area is a deer crossing, Supper Highway. As we get closer, we watch the eye shine go from probably a deer on all 4s rise if it's standing up. My son looks at me and asks if I just saw that. When we actually passed this deer, my son turned and got a good look out the window and said it looked like a deer, except its front legs looked all mangled and weird. Was telling my daughter and her friend about it, and her friend said what we saw and we described a year or so before, about a quarter of a mile down the road from where we saw that one. We encountered here off Detroit, off a 7 Mile in Woodward. It was like the thing from the movie The Ritual, but legs like a giraffe, body and tail like a leopard, and eyes in the front like a predator, and spikes coming down its back. This thing was ginormous, and its walk was creepy as hell. I live in northwest Georgia, up by the Tennessee line, and see spicy deer often on the back roads. Pennsylvania. No one outside of family and friends have heard about this. 13 to 14 years ago, my father and I were riding 4-wheelers in Michaud State Park, which runs along the Appalachian Trail. We stopped along the trail for a quick break, and from behind us, on top of a cliff, we heard something we both never heard. Rocks started sliding down the hill, which was only about 40 to 50 feet tall, straight up. We got on our 4-wheelers to head out of the area, and my dad let me go in front just in case something was coming after us. As we went down the trail, my dad led his four-wheeler in neutral, with it off to hear something running after us. And sure enough, you could hear limbs breaking off the pine trees alongside the trail. I looked back, and he waved me on, like, get the hell out of here. Needless to say, I was the fastest we ever loaded up and left there. I was right around the time Finding Bigfoot made its debut on TV. The first call they made, we both looked at each other with wide eyes, pale as a ghost, and didn't say anything, just looked right back at the TV. I still get chills even thinking about it. I revisited the spot 4 years ago and immediately got the chills and was shaking. Years ago, at dusk, I was new to the South Carolina mountains. I had been employed in my first job as a teacher coach near Tigerville, SC. When I was getting gas at a mom and pop station while talking with the owner, all of a sudden, down the mountain came this loud animal call. I will never forget it. I asked, "What is that?" His answer, with a grin, "Hard telling in these parts." It was loud, strong, and far away, but yet, it was just like it was across the field. Years later, I heard the same call again on the radio, identified as a Bigfoot call. I could only stare at the radio, knowing I had heard that before. When I left work at night, no lights outside, an elderly man dressed in old-fashioned suit and hat, like the 1920s, warned me of a man waiting to attack a woman alone in the parking lot. I thanked him and didn't know he knew, but he disappeared as soon as I looked back, like 2 seconds later. I went in and told the secretary what he said, and that he disappeared. She started shaking and saying that it happened to another girl. The man was an angel. We all went out together to our cars from then on. We seen the man and slammed his hands down in the car and left angry. I seen the black triangle about 2 years ago near Prestonburg. It was near dark and it was hovering just over the tree line. It suddenly turned neon green and was gone in a blink of an eye. I stood there and looked at the sky for about 5 minutes. Really couldn't wrap my mind around what I've just seen. Saw one in the southern tier of New York about 7 miles from the PA border back in the early 2000s. Scared the hell out of me and my brother. We were kids, outside playing. We lived in the woods across from a marsh. It was summertime. We saw it and just thought it was a crane at first, but it was way too big as it got closer. It looked like a dinosaur or a dragon more than a bird. It swooped down just above the tree line over the road, and its wings spread past the limits of the roadsides, a few treetops in. We hauled our butts to the trees and watched it fly before we ran back up the driveway and into the house. We didn't play outside for a week or two and decided to keep it to ourselves. We were sure Mom and Dad would accuse us of active imaginations. Southern Virginia. Flew over my car and I was absolutely astonished. Not 100% on Thunderbird, but boy, sure did it look like one. I lived in a house that was haunted by a little boy ghost. I saw him reflected in the dark TV screen once. He'd play small pranks on people, and even guests witnessed him pulling on a balloon string. Harmless, and therefore he stayed, though I did yell at him once, "Stop bothering me," when I was trying to nap one day, and he kept blowing in my face. Saw something run across the road on 2 feet with a long, thin tail, kind of like a monkey's tail. But the creature did not look like a monkey. It was at night and I live in the Appalachian Mountains in North Carolina. I seen a giant black deer. A lot of people stopped on the roadside to watch it. We thought it was a horse, but it was a deer. It was as big as a large horse. I seen a hyena-like creature, mountains of East Tennessee. Our dogs killed a creature in the early 70s. Small canine type with huge eyes and pointed ears. The one our dogs killed was about the size of a large gray fox. I hadn't thought of this in years, A friend and I were heading up the mountain at night. We both seen a creature walk across the road in front of my car. It was very tall and werewolf looking, hairy, longish snout, walking on long back feet, had a tail. The strangest thing about it is how it moved. Best way to describe it was very fast, but in slow motion. I hit the brakes and turned around to go the way it was going. I wanted to find it. I was in awe. My friend told me I was crazy and that's how people found dead. So it spooked me and we continued on our journey. No idea what it was or what it could have been. Some people believed us, others thought we were full of it. It was there. Just tonight, my coworker encountered a dark 5'7" being hunched shoulders crossing the road. When it looked at her, she said it had red, brownish, glowing eyes. There was a coyote a few feet from it. By the time she got to where it crossed the road, it had disappeared, but not the coyote. This was just south of Shawnee, Oklahoma. I told her it sounded like either a demon or a young Bigfoot, because I don't know any other creatures that have reddish, glowing eyes. She is not a Bigfoot fan or believer and only knows they're big and hairy. That's how she started the conversation. Can spirits cross the road? My niece was visiting Florida, and believe it or not, she had never heard of Bigfoot at the age of 12. They were driving through LaGrange, Ohio, just after dark, and saw the thing cross the road and came home and drew a picture. She was shaking like crazy. I was in a group of 4 in Tennessee, 2010, that had eye shine staring back at us for about 10 minutes. One guy started talking to it, and the eye shine got really bright as he spoke. I have the whole episode on audio recording. I've seen one in my life. Kentucky and Tennessee state line with my father about 1 a.m. We were at the car. I was 17, early 80s. There was loud braking noises coming from the woods by the car was parked. It ran across the road about 30 feet in front of us. I said nothing. I think Dad dropped the F-bomb. That thing was huge, brown looking, and across and gone in a few strides. I never forgot that night. Been looking for it ever since. Found prints, heard screams, banging, even seen rocks stacked like it was putting dishes in the sink. Smelled nasty, dead, rotten odors before. Never found hair yet, or got pictures. Yesterday, my wife and I were driving on a dirt road between Red Feather Lakes and the Padre River. And I said to my wife, this looks like a good spot to try your Bigfoot call. So she let out a nice whoop and got no response. So I tried my Bigfoot call, and 10 seconds later, we got a very loud wood knock. I couldn't believe my ears, and there was no way it could have been a person because the mountains on both sides of us were just too steep and dense with pine trees and vegetation for a person to move through. So we were convinced we had our first Bigfoot encounter. I just wish we could have seen him or her. Back in the early 80s, my cousin said a white Bigfoot around 9 feet tall ran in front of his car. It took 2 steps to clear the road, which is about 20 feet wide. This sitting wasn't more than 200 feet from where I found footprints some 30 years later. He lived right near where Bigfoot crossed the road, not more than 100 feet from the spot. My father and older brother told of how my cousin pulled up to his father's house, my uncle, hollering for him to get his gun. My uncle said he came outside to see what was going on and heard something crashing through the woods. And he had 2 Airedale dogs chained up in the yard that were going crazy, barking at what was ever running through the woods. My family and I now believe in Bigfoot 100%. He was very massive and very muscular. He looked like a bodybuilder of season. Not ripped, but massive. Moving was not an option. I have an inmate at work that is 6'9", 470 pounds, and this guy was bigger and taller. I think that's why I froze. I was helpless. Was hunting along the edge of a tree line, and one came over a low hill about 75 feet from me and entered the woods I was hunting in. I don't believe he knew I was there. I didn't stick around to find out. I had an encounter years ago around 4:30 a.m., and all I heard was grunting and growling, and I was absolutely terrified. I will also add that I live an hour away from Helen, Georgia, where Squatch was caught on police dash cam. My daughter and I were standing at the end of our driveway one night. At the time, we lived in a very rural area. Back in the woods behind the house, we heard what we could only describe as an animal you'd expect to hear in a jungle, CV, like a bird or a monkey, maybe. This was in north central Massachusetts, and it was snowing. Hey, I'm Connor from Bigfoot Anon, and I'm always on the hunt for the next big adventure. When you're on the trail for long hours, you build up quite the stench, enough to drive any skunk ape or yeti away. Luckily, I'm on the quest now for the solution to all my problems. Yeti bars. They do exist. Available in tons of different scents and fragrances. Check out YetiBars.net for more and use my code BA10 for a special offer. Clean like a beast. Yeti Bars!